I love Metroid. From the 2D games to the Prime series, the Metroid franchise has received massive critical acclaim, with Metroid Prime being the 11th highest rated game on Metacritic. Metroid is one of Nintendo's best IPs, and despite the lack of major releases in the 2010s, we've never been more back than ever, with Metroid Dread releasing in 2021 and Metroid Prime 4 Beyond releasing real soon. Finally, 8 years after the official reveal, we're getting the long-awaited sequel for a game that's almost 20 years old. Jesus Christ. How's it going? Gon here. To celebrate this occasion, let's take the best things in the world and talk about them. This is Metroid Lost Media. Even if you're not a fan of Metroid, well, I still think you're gonna have a blast. The first Metroid released in 1986 for the NES and became a staple of the console's legacy. It sold 2.73 million units and made many people question Samus' sexuality. He's a guy, damn it! The game manual says so. So Samus is obviously a— oh shit. My bad, ma'am. After Metroid's success, it would take a while for a sequel, but we got one for the Game Boy in form of Metroid 2 Return of Samus, a direct sequel to OG Metroid released in 1992. Return of Samus was once again a success, although many consider it the black sheep of the main Metroid series. I thought it was a decent game and not bad for a Game Boy game. It did introduce a bunch of series mainstays like this version of the Various suit, which became Samus's most popular look. But yeah, I get why not many people liked it. The game is not pretty and it doesn't have color. Where is the color? Ah, there it is. The Game Boy Color released in 1998, offering the same graphics as the original model, but this time with color. Long are the days of the piss filter. Alongside new games, Nintendo re-released old Game Boy games for the Game Boy Color, giving them the color treatment, like The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening DX and Tetris DX. And supposedly, Metroid 2 was meant to get the same treatment, but we're not entirely sure of its existence. Let me explain. This screenshot of what looks like to be Metroid 2 with colors was featured in early marketing material for the Game Boy Color, appearing in official documents and even in a German magazine called Club Nintendo. Not to be confused with the old Club Nintendo loyalty program. The screenshot found in that magazine made the rounds in the Metroid community and left many people confused. First and foremost, a Metroid 2 DX was never released nor announced by Nintendo. And secondly, the area depicted in that image does not exist in Return of Samus. Believe me, I've played it. It could be a Link's Awakening DX situation, where in that game we got an original location called the Color Dungeon, which wasn't present in the original game, but we're not sure about that. During an interview, Nintendo of America's Dan Ausen said that during the Game Boy Color's development, the team behind Metroid 2 made a test demo with colors, but he wasn't aware of plans to make a full color remake of the game, making the existence of this one unconfirmed. The third installment in the Metroid series, Super Metroid, released in 1994 for the SNES, and it was a massive critical and financial success. For many Metroid fans, Super Metroid is the best mainline Metroid game, and I've seen some people say this is the best video game of all time. It was just that good. And after the release of the Nintendo 64, people began to ask, when was the new Metroid coming out? And Miyamoto was too. When asked about what major Nintendo games we might see in the N64, Miyamoto's first answer was Metroid. Even if 2D games were being pushed to the side in favor of 3D games during the mid to late 90s, Miyamoto still believed in the potential of making 2D games in the N64. We did get Yoshi's Story after all. But Metroid was nowhere to be seen, but it was also beyond Miyamoto's control since he's not a series producer. In an interview, Metroid producer Yoshio Sakamoto, when asked about Metroid 64, said that when he first held the N64 controller in his hands, he couldn't imagine how Samus would move around and it was still too early for a fully 3D Metroid game. Sakamoto also stated that Nintendo approached the third-party company and asked if they would make a new Metroid for the N64, and they refused the offer, saying that they didn't have the confidence to make a follow-up that could compare to Super Metroid, which Sakamoto took as a compliment. The identity of this company is a complete mystery, and there aren't many leads, unfortunately. It's a shame we never got a Metroid on the N64. Samus's only presence during that whole era was in Smash Bros. We had to wait years for a sequel, and 8 years later, we got the best Metroid game of all time. Metroid Fusion is nothing short of greatness. Released in 2002 for the Game Boy Advance, this game presents us with an ominous atmosphere where you're completely alone in a deserted space station, contaminated by the Axe Parasite, a powerful virus that doesn't affect Samus, since she took a vaccine with Metroid DNA. Oh, that's why it's called Metroid Fusion. I could stay all day talking about this game, but let's save that for another time. You came for Lost Media is what you'll get. At E3 2001, we got our first look at Metroid Fusion and it was really weird. The video begins with the iconic screw attack logo, morph into a more stylized, smoother version of the logo? I don't know what's going on here. Then we are greeted with the title and this magnificent logo. At this point, the game was just called Metroid 4 and I don't know what direction they were going cause this logo looks way too different from not just the final one, but every game before it. I like it. It gives off the vibe of an edgy gross out toy from the 90s, kinda like creepy crawlers, remember that? It's weird, cause it kinda matches Fusion's vibes, so they could've kept it if they wanted to. I think they were going to take the Fusion in the literal sense. Samus's armor for Metroid 4 looks just like her original power armor, but black, and with some Metroid attributes like an antenna and claws? Maybe they should bring that back. Close combat Metroid would be pretty interesting to say the least. Alright, gameplay, and oh my god, what is that? Oh, we've got a lot to unpack here. Everything just feels wrong. Samus's movements feel bizarrely smooth for a GBA game. The colors look dull compared to the finished product, but maybe that's because the game began development on the Game Boy Color. The most interesting part about the gameplay is anti-gravity. In the video you can see Samus is walking on the ceiling and walls, and that's something we have yet to see in a Metroid game. Here's our first look at the PCL station, which looks simpler and linear compared to the final version. This version of Metroid Fusion was received with poor reception, and rightfully so. Unfortunately, or fortunately depending how you see it, a playable build or even a high quality video hasn't resurfaced. Now, my concern with this is that this is not actual gameplay. Yeah, what you're most likely seeing is not native GBA gameplay. Who would have thought? Many have pointed out the animations and, again, Samus's movement, and came to the conclusion that this is just a proof of concept, a basic showcase of how the game could work. I don't want to believe that, but it does feel that way. They literally showed the end of the game in this first trailer, and if this was the actual map, this game would have been shorter than the original Metroid. This was obviously far from the final version. But the fact we don't have a high quality image of Samus's armor saddens me. I can't make out half of this shit. I just want to see what could have been in a decent quality. There's another lost build we need to talk about, and this one follows the final version more closely with some changes. After 1 year of silence, Nintendo showed Metroid for a second time at E3 2002, and it looked like a completely different game. The title screen shows us a new logo which looks similar to the one we got, but if I'm being honest, it was a total downgrade. This one rocks. The gameplay looks virtually the same. Samus has her fusion armor and the X-Parasite is already present. The most notable difference here is the HUD, which features a different health bar. I can confidently say this version is a playable build instead of a pre-rendered video like the previous trailer. But we don't have any means to play it, so I hope someday we'll get to play the E3 2002 beta build of Metroid Fusion. The GBA was the Metroid console. Not only we got the sequel to one of the best games of all time, Metroid Fusion, but we also got a remake of the original Metroid, in form of Metroid Zero Mission. Zero Mission released 2 years after Metroid Fusion, and not only enhanced the graphics of the NES original, but expanded the core experience, with new locations, upgrades, and story cutscenes. But before all that crap, the game was going on an entirely different art direction. Zero Mission was unveiled at E3 2003, with the gameplay video showing a pretty faithful remake of the original Metroid. And what I mean by that is that the environment and characters look more cartoony and Samus looks just like her original look with the noodle limbs and all. I'm just worried about her posture, man. This looks fatal. Originally, the devs' intention was just that, faithfully recreate Metroid 1 down to the art direction. But after fan criticism, Nintendo forced them to change the game's look and we ended up getting the Metroid Zero Mission we have today. Look, I love this art style. It's unique, it's wacky, it's fun. But it didn't fit Metroid's vibe and next to the other games, this one would stick out like a sore thumb. Aside from this footage, this build of Zero Mission never got leaked and it's currently lost. Metroid Prime was first teased at Space World 2000, during a presentation Nintendo made to hype up the GameCube and its games. All we got was a pre-rendered animation of Samus running on a hallway, and Samus's design right here looks almost identical to her finalized look in Prime. The game was clearly in early development, and Nintendo didn't have much to show for it. That was until E3 2001. One of the big reveals during this event was Metroid Prime. We received a trailer showing a glimpse of the world, enemies, and of course, Samus herself. Samus's design was changed, giving her a bigger visor and a smaller arm cannon. We would finally see gameplay of this version of Metroid Prime at Space World 2001, and it looked rough. The most notable change here is the HUD. The left side of the screen is taken by the life meter and missile counter, because why not? The arm cannon is noticeably different too. Not only is it smaller than the final version, but it looks and shoots funny. Overall, this version of Prime looked weird and people were skeptical about it. Not only because this was the first attempt on a 3D Metroid game, but because it looked like S. So, Miss Metroid was redesigned once again and we got just one of the best games of all time. Aside from the E3 and Space World trailers and some screenshots, the 2001 beta build of Metroid Prime was never made available to the public, and it's lost media. Metroid 1.5 or Metroid International was an early pitch that never ended up releasing. The idea of 1.5 was pitched by Tony Giovannini, a game designer that formerly worked at Retro Studios, and it happened sometime after Metroid Prime's launch. The game would include multiplayer and online, which was a first for Metroid. The game would pick up right after the first Metroid Prime, and would follow Samus exploring a parallel dimension. Seem familiar? Yeah, some cues from 1.5 were reworked and implemented into Metroid Prime 2. This was basically one piece of the puzzle for the creation of Prime 2. Many enemies were planned for 1.5, and thanks to the artist Andrew Jones, who had a major part in the art of the Prime trilogy, we can have an idea of some of them. The most interesting one is no doubt Metroid. He's basically a hybrid between a Metroid and a human being. This design rocks. I'd love to see something like this on the next Prime game. Unfortunately, 1.5 was never made and we never got that online mode, but after Metroid Prime Federation Force, I think I'm good. Here's another game that was pitched but never picked up. Metroid Tactics was supposed to be another spin-off of the Prime series, in the same vein as Federation Force or Metroid Prime Pinball. But this one was different. Tactics' main appeal was its turn-based gameplay. Yes, Metroid was going the XCOM route. In Metroid Tactics, you would play as Samus or any other bounty hunter while battling iconic Metroid enemies. The game was pitched shortly after Metroid Prime 3's release in 2007, and was intended to release on the Wii. Unfortunately, Metroid Tactics never entered production, since Retro Studios was already working on 3 games after Prime 3, and the team was already getting tired of working on the Metroid franchise. It shows. Nintendo never saw the pitch. Metroid Dread? What do you mean Metroid Dread is lost media? I've got it right here. Yes, Metroid Dread did release on the Switch in 2021, but it wasn't the first iteration of Dread. Right after the success of Metroid Fusion and the release of the new Nintendo DS, Sakamoto began working on the idea of the 5th game in the series. Sakamoto wanted to expand the stealth sequences from Fusion and implement a more fear-based experience, although he didn't want it to be a horror game. He basically wanted a pumped-up version of the SAX, which we got in the final version of Dread with the Emmys. Development began around 2005, and the name Metroid Dread was found on a leaked official document listing upcoming DS games. And since this was coinciding with E3 2005, speculation ran rampant, and fans were convinced that an announcement would follow. E3 2005 came and went and no mention of Metroid Dread was made. In 2006, the game was officially announced in the official Nintendo magazine, with the release date of November that same year. As more issues came out, this release date turned into "to be confirmed", and the magazine urged readers to wait till E3 for more information. But then, it happened again. E3 ended and Dread was nowhere to be seen. Things were quiet, until people discovered that when you scan a terminal in the Metroid processing room in Metroid Prime 3, you get a message saying, "Experiment status report update. Metroid Project Dread is nearing the final stages of completion." So Dread must be close, right? Well, no. Nintendo deemed it as simply coincidental and issued a statement saying that no 2D Metroid was in development. But not all hope was lost, cause right before E3 2009, Nintendo R&D 1 prepped up a playable prototype of Metroid Dread to be shown to Nintendo's other divisions. Reportedly, this version had dropped the Metroid Dread title and was simply called Metroid. The graphics and art style were similar to Metroid Fusion's, and was described as a literal port of Metroid Fusion for the DS. The Emmys were absent since they were still being worked on, so what you got here was, like I said, Metroid Fusion for the DS. The prototype did not meet Sakamoto's expectations, so the project was shelved. The team wanted to create something intimidating and radically different from Fusion, but it proved too difficult to achieve that with DS hardware. The technology wasn't there yet. That was until Nintendo's E3 2021 Nintendo Direct, when out of nowhere, Metroid Dread was finally announced for an October 2021 release. Metroid Dread is one of the best games on the original Switch, and unfortunately, no prototype builds, including the E3 2009 one, have ever surfaced, and it's hard to say they'll ever happen. Builds like these get found once in a blue moon, so we'll have to wait and see and hope that we find a piece of Metroid history. Alright, I'm pooped. I've talked all the Metroid lost media, to my knowledge at least. Oh, that ass.